The thing to understand about AZT is that it's not an antiretroviral drug, no matter that it's billed as such. It is a cell poison. It was invented in the autumn of 1961 by Professor Richard Belts, a biochemist, to kill human cells as a potential chemotherapy in Nixon's war on cancer. No, it was actually before that, but it developed into that. So if it is designed to kill human cells, one would imagine that it's quite good at that, and indeed it is. It is toxic to every cell it reaches, from heart, muscle, liver, kidney, skin, nail, bone, brain, nerve cells. Every cell it reaches, it either kills or it maims, you see. And then it gives rise to every kind of ill effect. It is very, very poisonous to mitochondria. Mitochondria are those energy-producing organelles inside human cells, which are essential to healthy human metabolism. They're essential to life. You knock out mitochondria, you knock out the cell's ability to function. You either kill them off or you impair their functioning, and AZT hits them both ways. It's both directly toxic and also it inhibits them. And when you damage mitochondria permanently or impair their function, then the toxic ill effects are massive across a broad range. Also, the terrible thing about mitochondrial toxicity is that it tends to show up later. So children, for example, exposed to AZT in the womb and neonatally shortly after birth, they show up fine. They're not born as in thalidomide children with arms, with little flippers for arms or missing limbs completely, or no ears, or deaf, and that kind of stuff. No, these children tend to be born, they present normally at birth clinically, and then the ill effects of the drug show up months later. There was no controversy about AZT until President Mbeki ventilated the trouble with the drug. In other words, he brought to public attention that the drug is very toxic and a danger to human health, which indeed it is. It's black and white. In fact, it's very poisonous. It was invented to kill human cells. My review of the literature on the drug, which President Mbeki introduced the world to, that sparked a debate. That sparked a controversy. It was unprecedented for a head of state to impeach a licensed drug in this way, and a drug which wasn't just any old drug. This is a drug that has been touted as a life-saving, sacrament, and so it was the vilest heresy to impugn the drug and to suggest that we'd been led up the garden path, and that the propaganda consensus, the propaganda reality, was at odds with the brute facts. I excerpted some of those studies in a pamphlet which I put about widely, hoping to forestall the introduction of AZT in pregnancy in this country as a matter of national policy. Why do Zaki Ahmed, Nathan Geffen and Mark Hayward want pregnant African women and their babies to be given AZT? What AZT does to unborn and newly born children. And there's it's just a collection of citations from the literature showing that children exposed to AZT in the womb and after birth have a much higher rate of serious disease, neurological disorders, immunological disorders, and early death, a high rate of early death than unexposed children. Now, you would wonder, why then would anybody in their right mind want to continue giving pregnant women AZT when it's been shown that the drug increases the rate of illness and early death among their babies? Well, it's because the experts are always delighted by their lab results, but they pay no attention to the clinical outcomes of what they're doing. So on the assumption that this drug is saving babies' lives, they continue administering it, and they simply disregard the hard clinical evidence, conspicuous clinical evidence that children are being harmed by it. The very discoverer, by reputation anyway, of HIV, Professor Lip Montaigne of the Pasteur Institute, has correctly observed that AIDS has no particular symptoms, unlike mumps. or measles. It has a wide array of symptoms are considered AIDS defining. If a child begins to waste away after a blast of AZT in the womb and after birth, then doctors are inclined to conclude, the germ, the virus is just too strong to be defeated by our strong medicines. It never occurs to them that the reason why the child is sickening and wasting away and maybe dying, or remains sickly throughout its life, or has impaired hearing or impaired sight or impaired ability to concentrate throughout its life, or spastic, or what all those things I mentioned earlier. It never occurs to these AIDS expert doctors who are administering these drugs that they caused the harm by administering these drugs. Medical academics have been almost unanimous in their support of these drugs. Professor Mhlongo is a notable exception. He's left us now. I can think of a couple of others, but they're not particularly vocal because the politics are very intense. You speak out against the stuff and your career gets damaged. There are a couple of medical professors at UCT who have poo-pooed literature, described the literature. One of them, Professor Korabas, described the literature that I cite in the mainstream medical and scientific press as garbage. Garbage, Another one, Robin Wood, says no, it doesn't cause blindness, paralysis, spasticity, brain damage, all the things I've described. No. It ensures a happy and healthy life for these babies. It saves their lives. This is sort of a kind of religious conviction that has no tie to the facts. It's like when a regnant paradigm is too deeply entrenched, too deeply piled, then information at odds with the popular episteme bounces off like a ping pong ball. It doesn't come in. It doesn't reach the minds of those hearing it because they can't fit it in. You see, the propaganda consensus is just too strong. After the Medicines Control Council botched the inquiry ordered by President Mbeki in Parliament, and the Cochrane Institute here in Cape Town did no better, all eyes suddenly turned to nevirapine. Now, nevirapine was being touted on the strength of a single clinical trial conducted in Uganda in around 1999. That's when it ended. It was being touted as a miracle magic bullet cure, a magic bullet preventative treatment. And it was said on the strength of this trial that a single pill given to the mother in labor and a single squirt of syrup down the newborn baby's throat would protect the baby and prevent it from getting the mother's sex virus, HIV. And everybody now rushed for this drug. I mean, Zaki Ahmed described it as a life-saving medicine that keeps people with HIV living longer and healthier lives. And Judge Edwin Cameron, Supreme Court of Appeal, said it's a very good drug. And the government's reluctance to provide it to poor African mothers and their babies was a tragedy, I think.
So what we are talking about is a trial that we're running in all 9 provinces, urban and rural sites, so that we can see down the road how does the public health system cope with this, to try to respond also then to the matters raised by the Medicines Control Council, which said as it licensed, there are a number of matters that have not been answered with regard to this. So it's that kind of experiment. It'll do all of those things. So we need some answers before you say this matter is generally, the drug is generally available on the public health system. So that's what's happening.
In the TAC won an order compelling the government to provide it, to abandon its 18-site pilot study, which had been approved, by the way, by UNAIDS, and to make nevirapine available to all pregnant women and the women in labor and the newborn babies. The case went on appeal, and again the government lost. I tried to head this off by drawing an urgent application on behalf of Professor Sam Mhlongo of Medical University of Southern Africa. It was an urgent, last-minute attempt to get a hearing, bringing to the attention of the Constitutional Court the latest developments, namely that since the TAC had won its order, the manufacturer of nevirapine, Boehringer Ingelheim in Germany, had withdrawn its application to the American Food and Drug Administration for a special license to market the drug for preventing mother-to-child transmission of HIV. We learned a little later why. HIV and Aids 012, the linchpin of the TAC's case, the foundation of the order won by the TAC, was a complete shambles. I also brought to the court's attention the fact that in May, on the 17th of May, the Centers for Disease Control omitted nevirapine from its recommendations, drug recommendations for preventing mother-to-child transmission. You see? So that this drug is now out. But the Constitutional Court was unperturbed and proceeded to adjudicate the case as if nothing had changed, as if the substrate of the case hadn't changed fundamentally.
I think that there's always this tension between research results and policy. If we hold off and do more research to find out if this is the correct thing, how many people will die? If this research was spurious in its findings and we then implement it, how many people will we have harmed? So it's that balance. And I think that sort of revising the single-dose nevirapine debate is really is going over that kind of an argument. There's no doubt that single-dose nevirapine saved a lot of babies. And it did not do much harm, except for the production of resistance, and that's why we changed our guidelines.
In July 2003, the Medicines Control Council finally announced that it had rejected HIV and Aids 012. That's the trial on the basis of which the Treatment Action Campaign won an order compelling our government to provide the drug to women in labor and the newborn babies. So the trial was knocked out, despite the best efforts of the Americans to whitewash its problems and persuade the MCC to keep it on its books. There are many, many unreported deaths which came to light in 2004 and early 2005, thanks to the whistleblower Jonathan Fishbein. He went public to expose the fact that the head of the division had binned a shocking clinical toxicity report by the pediatric drug safety experts in his own division. He'd received the thing, torn it up, and written his own to paint the drug in a sunny light. The medical industrial complex closed ranks. The whistleblower got fired. The political ramifications were just too big. I mean, President Bush had allocated $500 million for the purchase of nevirapine for African women. And it's really just too big to say, this is a terrible blunder. You know, the scientists and the medical experts have let us all down. So the ship just rolls on. By rights, the drug should have been deregistered, but the Medicines Control Council is too politically weak to take such a drastic step, particularly having regard to the fact that the TAC formally resolved in August 2002 that if the formal resolution that if the MCC deregistered nevirapine, it would sue in the High Court to interfere. You know, in the propaganda climate prevailing in our country, it's just not possible for the TAC to lose. The judges love them. The judges think these guys are human rights champions, as opposed to pimps for the pharmaceutical industry. Full of human rights enthusiasm, but just not paying attention to the details, not paying attention to the facts. The Trouble with Nevirapine is a book I've been writing on and off for the last 7 years or so. It is really a very thorough history of the drug, the way in which it got licensed in the US and Canada and the rest of the world. It's an amazing story. It's just amazing. And then a history of the nevirapine controversy in our country. It looks at all the major literature on the drug, and it also reviews the political history of the drug the passage of the drug through the MCC, the way in which our government was ordered by the high and then constitutional courts to provide the drug in maternity wards in the country's public hospitals, and a bit of the aftermath. Also a look at the political history of the drug in Germany, which is the place where the drug is produced by the German privately owned drug corporation Boehringer Ingelheim. The extended ultimatum, so to say, issued by the MCC to Boehringer Ingelheim to come up with alternative acceptable clinical trial evidence supporting the continued registration of nevirapine for use in maternity wards had long come and gone. When I wrote to the MCC in July 2004 asking how they were doing with their review and what they decided to do, a couple of weeks later the MCC responded by issuing a statement recording that it no longer supported the use of nevirapine solo for preventing mother-to-child transmission, but that it should in future be combined with AZT treatment. Now, in the first place, that recommendation was grossly irregular for the basic reason that the MCC has no jurisdiction to go about making treatment recommendations. It's not its function or its province. It's not the FDA. It's not the American Centers for Disease Control. It's strictly a drug regulatory body. But what the MCC's members were trying to do was duck the imperative it faced to deregister nevirapine on the basis that it was no good, that there was no good evidence supporting its continued use in maternity wards. So it ducked sideways, you see, and recommended the use of AZT in combination with nevirapine. To date, the company has not provided any acceptable substitute clinical trial evidence warranting the continued registration of the drug for preventing mother-to-child transmission. On the 1st of October 2007, the Treatment Action Campaign, through its de facto legal wing, the AIDS Law Project, sent a letter to Dr. Chabalala Msimang demanding, really, a date for the implementation of change in policy and the introduction of these drugs. The 1st of October 2007 was the precise 50th anniversary of the commencement of the thalidomide tragedy, about which no one needs any introduction. So I tried to forestall the horror looming. I put about a press statement, which I copied onto government, SANAC, ANC, MRC, other interested parties, and put online. Not a single journalist or newspaper editor to whom I copied the thing, and I copied it very widely, responded. I'm holding here a pamphlet issued by the Perinatal HIV Research Unit of the Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital. It's called "I Am Pregnant, How Can I Protect My Baby from HIV? What are the side effects?" And it reads, common to AZT and nevirapine are headaches, stomach disturbances, general tiredness, chest pains, tingling sensation of hands and feet, and cough. Nevirapine also has mild rash, and in a very small number of women, a yellow discoloration of the skin, jaundice. Yeah, there's no mention in this pamphlet of the findings that came to light much later in HIV Net 012 of what were described by one of the principal investigators, Laura Guy, as thousands, quote unquote, of unreported adverse events, serious adverse events. Women are not told here that their babies could be fatally poisoned by these drugs. I mean, we're dealing with cell toxins. They're very toxic indeed. There's no mention in here of anemia, of potentially fatal liver damage, of mitochondrial toxicity in general, brain damage to the babies. There's no mention here that, for example, a child might be born blind or become blind later, as Blanchett L. found in 1999, confirmed in 2003 by her collaborators Barre et al. So this is grossly inadequate. This would never count in a court case as adequate informed consent. This pamphlet fails to alert mothers to the potential harm that they, and more particularly their babies, are exposed to by the administration of AZT and nevirapine. Resistance to the TAC agenda, which is the corporate pharmaceutical agenda, has become impossible in our country. The propaganda climate is so thick, it's so intense. All the judges, I haven't heard a judge speak against these guys, all the judges think that the TAC are human rights crusaders with right on their side. They're in the business of saving little babies. It's all very heartwarming. And none of them are applying their minds to the facts. They've been responsible for, poisoning the most vulnerable part of the population of our country. Mostly African, poor, pregnant women and their babies. In the case of the babies, these are children who will disappear into the rural wastes or the peri-urban shacks, and no one's keeping tabs on how they do. There's a hard precedent for this, which I find very appalling. It's the treatment of pregnant women with mercury and with arsenic. Mercury for ages, but arsenic in the first half of last century was called Salvasan. Here it is. I've got a box of it, which I found in a medical curiosity shop. And this is 20% arsenic. These ampules were, mixed with water or some other solvent, put into a steel and glass syringe and injected into people. Arsenic. Today, the experts get their knickers in a knot in regard to whether 10, 20, or 50 parts per billion in the drinking water are permissible. But no, the experts used to inject this stuff into people. And when children were born blind, paralyzed, very sick, died early, stillborn too, then the medical experts said, oh, but you see, the drug wasn't strong enough. We know it's very toxic, but no, it was just not strong enough, and the germ got the better of these babies. The syphilis spirochete, Treponema pallidum, they blamed the germ. So history repeating itself.